Hello, this is Claudia, and for the next hour I'll be reading from the August 5th issue of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Inside the Oval Office, showdown between Trump and Jeanine Pirro. Jeanine Pirro, the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, told President Trump that his Interior Secretary, Doug Burgum, had misled him with a self-serving cover story for his own mistakes. Jeanine Pirro had had it up to here with Doug Burgum. The famously voluble U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia strode into the Oval Office late Monday with her future on the line and the Interior Secretary, whom she privately called an incompetent liar, in her crosshairs. A few hours earlier, in front of the cameras from the Resolute desk, President Trump had accused Ms. Pirro, an ally and friend from New York going back decades, of folding like an umbrella and choking after she withdrew charges against a man accused of destroying the lining of his beloved but shoddily renovated Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool. Why was he so angry at her? Because Ms. Pirro had dared to publicly demolish one of his most cherished narratives, promoted by Mr. Burgum, that vandals, and not a contractor, hired by the Interior Department to do a rushed job, had defaced a Washington landmark. Mr. Trump raged against Ms. Pirro in private on Monday. Then he raged a little to reporters. Rumors she would be fired burbled through West Wing. Then he raged a little bit more before hosting a high-drama, face-to-face meeting with Ms. Pirro at the White House worthy of two decorated veterans of confrontational reality TV. Mr. Burgum had been invited too, so Ms. Pirro came prepared. She entered the White House from the West Executive driveway in a bright red blazer that matched her fight-back mood, schlepping a white box containing evidence, plus a black box with documents on wheels. Waiting for her in the Oval Office, along with the President, Mr. Trump's Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, and David Warrington, the White House counsel. After about an hour of intense back and forth, Ms. Pirro emerged with her job intact, for now. Speaking to reporters during a trip to the West Coast on Tuesday evening, Mr. Trump said he had told Ms. Pirro he was not happy with her filing and was still weighing her future. "I haven't made a determination," he said, when asked if Ms. Pirro's job was safe. During the meeting on Monday, Ms. Pirro, her voice raised at times, directly confronted Mr. Burgum, accusing him of misleading the president. She made the case that Mr. Burgum had promoted a self-serving cover story to conceal his own missteps. Mr. Burgum spoke less, but did his best to defend himself, according to a person briefed on the exchange requesting anonymity to discuss internal conversations. Mr. Trump seemed considerably less angry by day's end, the person said. Spokespeople for the White House, Ms. Pirro and Mr. Burgum, did not respond to requests for comment. This account, based on interviews with several people with knowledge of the events, demonstrated a core truth of Mr. Trump's second term. Anyone willing to contradict the president is in trouble, even if the dissenter happens to be a family friend who has faithfully executed his prosecutorial agenda over the years. The saga began on July 2nd, when a fired-up Ms. Pirro appeared before members of the news media to announce that her office had indicted David Hearn, age 67, a former Olympic canoeist, on a single count of felony vandalism after he had been observed damaging the pool lining. "This is not only a priority for the president but for myself," Ms. Pirro said, adding, "We will prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Hearn willfully destroyed property." She did not. Last Friday, Ms. Pirro beat a humbling prosecutorial retreat in a 20-page court filing, admitting that her fast-track July indictment of the three-time Olympian had been based on false assumptions and incomplete evidence. The document amounted to an indictment of sorts of Mr. Burgum, the contractor hired to repair the pool, Atlantic Industrial Coatings, and U.S. Park Police officials. Ms. Pirro's filing suggested that Mr. Burgum had committed the twofold sin of failing to competently oversee the renovation, then prodding Mr. Trump to accept the vandals did it story. Ms. Pirro said that her staff had relied almost exclusively on claims by Interior Department officials that extensive damage to the lining was caused by Mr. Hearn and other vandals who were observed tugging at or removing pieces of material from the wall. After reviewing thousands of pages of evidence, she concluded the department had rushed and botched the renovation, and that bad information from park police officials had led her to cite tremendous evidence against Mr. Hearn that did not exist. The whole episode had a vaguely comic air. Why would the leader of the free world juggling war and a wobbly economy fixate on a pool liner? But consequences for Mr. Hearn were anything but. The felony charge carried a maximum 10-year prison term based on an assessment by Miss Pirro's team that the damage inflicted amounted to more than $1,000. Miss Pirro knew full well that U-turn could infuriate Mr. Trump, but decided to cram her filing with enough evidence to decisively disprove Mr. Burgum's claims. She gave the White House a heads-up last week before filing the motion to dismiss the charge against Mr. Hearn in federal court, although it was not clear if Mr. Trump was briefed, according to people familiar with the situation who requested anonymity to discuss internal deliberations. Ominous signals from Mr. Trump began to emerge on Saturday morning, a day after Miss Pirro filed her motion. I disagree 100% with Jeanine Pirro, Mr. Trump wrote in a post on Truth Social. I don't know what she was thinking. To me, it was pure case of vandalism. He added there may have been some contractor difficulty, but the major damage was caused by vandals. Mr. Burgum took to social media to defend himself soon afterward. His staff provided the U.S. Attorney's Office expert and eyewitness testimony to the damage done by vandals and provided every piece of evidence they asked for. In the requested timeline detailing each area of the damage at the pool, he wrote, Mr. Trump seems at first to have taken Mr. Burgum's side and grew steadily angrier at Miss Pirro as the weekend ground on. By mid-Monday, he pounced when asked a Pirro question at a press availability in the Oval Office, saying he was disappointed and accusing Miss Pirro of being too afraid to present the case to the judge in the Hearn case. Notably, he did not answer a question from a reporter about Miss Pirro's future employment. Why Miss Pirro, who knows Mr. Trump's personality and trigger points better than almost anyone outside his family, was willing to risk the president's wrath remains somewhat unclear. After reviewing thousands of pages of evidence over the past few weeks, Miss Pirro determined the Hearn indictment needed to be rescinded before it was thrown out of court, according to two people close to the situation. Her critics have questioned whether her motive was nearly so straightforward or altruistic. They suggest that Miss Pirro's decision to withdraw the indictment was self-protective. She might be trying to head off a disciplinary action that could result if grand jury testimony or other internal materials are made public. Mr. Hearn's lawyer said she was guilty of what she had accused Mr. Burgum of doing, rushing to take an action to appease her boss, and that she had ample access before indicting Mr. Hearn to evidence showing that the damage had been caused by the contractor. The contractor, Atlantic Industrial Coatings, has not responded to the queries about the case, but a June 21st statement on the company's website says there are some areas of the pool that require repairs. Miss Pirro, who rose to prominence in the jostling New York City tabloid market alongside Mr. Trump, has also demonstrated a greater sense of independence than many other senior department officials whose careers have been entirely made and can be unmade by Mr. Trump. She left a far higher-paying job at Fox News to take over the U.S. Attorney job, is lukewarm on Washington, and has told friends, some of them skeptical, that she sees her current post as a capstone, not a stepping stone, and does not fear a "you're fired" moment. Yet by all accounts, Miss Pirro offered a spirited defense of herself on Monday and appears determined to win her battle with Mr. Burgum and eventually win back Mr. Trump. After Trump's Board of Peace made a plan for Gaza, the bombings grew worse. President Trump announced a proposal aimed at achieving the disarmament of Hamas and an Israeli withdrawal. Israel ramped up attacks on the Palestinian enclave. Soon after President Trump announced a new plan last week to deliver peace and security in Gaza, the Palestinian enclave instead experienced a spike in deadly Israeli bombings, which threatened to undermine hopes for long-awaited progress. On Sunday, Israeli strikes killed 18 people, according to the health ministry in Gaza, making it one of the deadliest days there since a troubled ceasefire came into force in October. Gaza Health Ministry data from the conflict does not distinguish between civilians and combatants. Israeli strikes a day earlier killed at least 2 people and damaged warehouses for medical supplies. Palestinian officials said. And on Monday, the Israeli military struck a car on a beachside road, killing 2 according to Gazan officials. No new Israeli strikes have been reported in Gaza since Monday evening. With many of the plan's details still unclear, including a timetable for the Hamas disarmament at its heart, the 15-point plan released by Mr. Trump's Board of Peace, which also calls for an Israeli withdrawal and a new administration in Gaza, risks being undone before the specifics are worked out. On Monday, a spokesman for the Israeli Prime Minister's office, Doron Spielman, pushed back against the terms of the agreement, which Israel had not signed. The version that has been made public does not reflect Israel's positions, he said in a statement. He added Israel has conveyed its comments and concerns on the proposed framework to our American counterparts. He said the concerns centered on the issue of Hamas disarmament. Nikolai E. Mladenov, a veteran Bulgarian diplomat, who is the Board of Peace's High Representative for Gaza, leveled rare criticism at Israel over its attacks. 2 days of strikes across Gaza have killed civilians and destroyed medical supplies that people depend on, he said in a statement posted on social media on Sunday. He said that the attacks came after intense efforts by the mediators to reach a deal, and that he and his team were working around the clock with the parties, mediators, and regional partners to de-escalate. In a joint statement on Monday, 3 countries that have served as mediators, Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey, condemned what they described as the ongoing Israeli violations in Gaza. Hamas said in a statement that entire families were wiped out on Sunday, and it accused Israel of a deliberate escalation aimed at blocking the plan. The Israeli military had said that its strikes in recent days have targeted Hamas fighters and weapons infrastructure. It also said it has taken steps to mitigate harm to civilians. Since the October ceasefire, Israel has steadily stepped up attacks across the Gaza Strip. In July, the military carried out almost daily strikes and named at least 50 militants it said it had eliminated, including what it said were Hamas members who had participated in the October 7, 2023 assault on Israel that killed about 1,200 people. That attack ignited the war in Gaza, which had left more than 70,000 dead, according to officials, and much of the enclave in ruins. On Tuesday, a mass funeral was held in Gaza City for 112 people whose bodies had been pulled from the rubble in recent weeks, according to Mahmoud Basal, a spokesman for the civil defense, which operates under the Hamas-run Interior Ministry. Michael Milstein, an Israeli analyst and a former Israeli military intelligence official specializing in Palestinian affairs, said it was no coincidence that Israel had recently increased its pace of attacks. Israel was either showing it did not care about the agreement, he said, or there was a fear that the point may come when the United States tells Israel to stop, and the military was striking while it still could. On Sunday night, Mohammed Dalan, an influential Palestinian exile and a confidant of the President of the United Arab Emirates, wrote on social media that Jared Kushner, a son-in-law and an aide to Mr. Trump, had provided assurances that he reached an agreement with Israel that it would cease its strike. But shortly thereafter, he edited the post, deleting the reference to an agreement, and said Mr. Kushner had conveyed he was working with the Israeli side to stop the attacks on Gaza. Negotiators on the Board of Peace described the new agreement with Hamas, announced by Mr. Trump last week, as a roadmap intended to cement the fragile ceasefire, disarm Hamas, secure a complete Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, and enable a return to normalcy for the population and the start of reconstruction. But key questions immediately arose over whether Hamas and Israel would carry out the agreement. According to the text, the parties were given 2 weeks to determine a schedule which an international verification committee could extend. Stark differences have already emerged over sequencing, among other issues. The agreement with Hamas stipulates that Israel must initially fulfill its obligations under the October ceasefire deal, which called for an immediate suspension of Israeli attacks. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel had pledged total victory over Hamas, along with its dismantlement. He said on social media on Tuesday that Israel would not pull back from its current positions in Gaza before Hamas had completely disarmed. Hamas, for its part, has long touted armed struggle against Israel as the core of its ideology. The group's weapons have so far helped it keep power in Gaza, though Hamas has said it is willing to hand over the administration of the territory to a committee of Palestinian technocrats working under the Board of Peace's supervision. Palestinian analysts said Israelis' continued airstrikes in Gaza strengthen Hamas's officials' argument that Israel will press its military campaign even if the group agrees to disarm. They're saying, "Look, I told you so," said Akram Attallah, a Palestinian columnist who is originally from Gaza and lives in London. They feel like Israel is proving them right. Hamas now says it agreed to relinquish its heavy weapons, in part on condition that Israel commits to halting attacks and withdrawing. The group had found itself with a few regional allies, and most of its senior leaders in Gaza have been killed. In an Instagram post on Tuesday, Mr. Netanyahu said, "We are not withdrawing from our current lines until Hamas is totally disarmed." Mr. Spielman, the Israeli government spokesman, said that over the past 8 months, according to Israeli intelligence, Hamas has used the ceasefire to rearm, recruit thousands of additional terrorists, rebuild its military infrastructure, and prepare for further October 7th-style massacres. The 15th-point plan has left elements of disarmament vague. It calls for a gradual, sequential, and time-bound manner for decommissioning and storing heavy weapons, with the timetable yet to be determined. The agreement, however, adds that, at the end of the process, only the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, the group of Palestinian technocrats hoping to take over governing under the Board of Peace's administration, will hold, control, or store weapons in Gaza. No weapons will be handed to Israel or non-Palestinian parties. The Board of Peace has tried to downplay the differences. After Mr. Maldanoff and other board members met on Monday with Mr. Netanyahu, the board said in a post on social media that it and Israel share a common understanding of the ultimate objectives. The goal is clear and is not in question: the complete decommissioning of weapons in the Strip and the transition away from rule by the gun to civilian governance, the board statement said. It added, reaching it will be a process. In Gaza, residents expressed doubts that Israel and Hamas would carry out the agreement, stoking fears the population could be left in limbo indefinitely. "We're worried nothing will change," said Saeed Abu Aida, 46, who is from Jabalia in northern Gaza. His 2 daughters were killed in an Israeli strike early in the war, he said, and he and his surviving family remain displaced in a tent in central Gaza. For the past 2 years, Mr. Abu Aida said he has been trying to gain permission to leave Gaza and reunite with his brother in France. The latest agreement has done little to make him want to stay put. "We're not reassured about the situation at all," he said. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. What one witness saw moments before a fire started, a resident of Spokane County, Washington, said he noticed a man acting suspiciously and called 911 after seeing smoke. The police later arrested a suspect tied to one of the wildfires in the area. Paul Child and his grandson were about half a mile from their home outside Spokane, Washington, when they spotted a man standing over a stretch of tall grass and trees near a railroad. The man appeared fidgety and nervous when he saw Mr. Child's car approaching, Mr. Child said. Soon after reaching home, Mr. Child heard his daughter call from the backyard, saying she saw smoke nearby. "I ran out the door," said Mr. Child, age 64, who suspected that the man he had seen had started a fire. The family called 911 and prepared to evacuate while Mr. Child drove down the road to warn his neighbors. Within 20 minutes, firefighters and a police officer arrived to a fire that was already out of control. The authorities said in an affidavit that they had detained a man named Aaron F. Farinacci and asked Mr. Child to confirm whether he was the same man he had seen moments earlier. He did. The blaze, later named the Old Trails Fire, quickly became one of the 3 fast-spreading wildfires in Spokane County that have scorched more than 10,000 acres since last weekend. The fires, which were still active as of Tuesday, have forced some 65,000 people, including the Child family, to evacuate their homes. At least 700 structures have been destroyed in the blazes, but no fatalities have been reported. When the police detained Mr. Farinacci, age 37, on Saturday, the origins of the fires were unknown according to court records. When Mr. Farinacci was questioned, he denied starting the fire. The affidavit states, and the authorities let him go. By the next day, though, investigators had found that the Old Trails fire was consistent with the one started by a lighter or match, and that they discovered that it had begun in the same spot where Mr. Child had reported seeing the man. On Monday, Mr. Farinacci was arrested and charged with one count of first-degree arson, which is punishable by up to life in prison and a $50,000 fine upon conviction. He is being held on a $1 million bond. Mr. Farinacci made his first court appearance on Tuesday afternoon. A judge kept the bond and said that Mr. Farinacci could not be in possession of any lighters, matches, torches, or fire-starting devices if the bond were posted. The judge scheduled an arraignment for Thursday afternoon, when Mr. Farinacci is expected to enter a plea. Colin Charbonneau, the director of the county's public defender's office, said that he represented Mr. Farinacci during Tuesday's hearing and that a lawyer in his office would likely be assigned to represent Mr. Farinacci starting Wednesday. He did not comment further on the case. Mr. Farinacci was carrying waterproof matches and a butane lighter when he was arrested, said Sheriff John Nowles of Spokane County. Court documents show that Mr. Farinacci had been investigated in connection with two wildfires in Washington last summer, but he was not arrested in either case. In 2012, Mr. Farinacci was convicted of a felony in Arizona in the death of his father. He pleaded guilty to manslaughter and aggravated assault after initially being charged with first-degree murder, according to court records from Maricopa County. Records for that case show that Mr. Farinacci, who was 21 years old at the time of the killing, fatally shot his father after an argument in their home. He told investigators that he had not intended to shoot his father and that he had tried to kill himself afterward. Court records showed a history of mental illness and treatment, but he was declared fit to stand trial. Under a plea deal, the murder charge was dropped and Mr. Farinacci was released on probation in 2020. Neither Mr. Farinacci's mother nor his siblings responded to requests for comment on Tuesday. Nobody answered the door at a Spokane apartment that was listed as Mr. Farinacci's residence. At some point after his release on probation, court records show Mr. Farinacci moved to Washington, where he worked a full-time job and lived with his brother and later with his girlfriend. On Sunday, Mr. Child returned to his home, which survived the fire. He wondered whether he should have stopped and confronted the man he saw. "I do second-guess myself whether I could have done something more," he said, "but it's good to see there might be accountability." Earlier in the week, weather conditions had improved, allowing some evacuees to return. But on Tuesday, the National Weather Service said that smoke from the wildfires had extended into western Washington and was causing poor air quality. Higher temperatures and drier air forecasts for later this week were expected to bring a return to extremely critical fire weather. Uber's strategy for fighting sexual assault suits. What were you wearing? The ride-hailing giant promised to handle legal claims in a way that is best for the survivor. Its lawyers are pursuing a far more aggressive strategy. A 24-year-old woman logged onto a video conference from her bedroom in Florida on a Friday morning in April 2025 to face a deposition in her lawsuit against Uber. Her driver had already pleaded guilty in criminal court to raping her vaginally, anally, and orally while she was unconscious during a ride in Tampa one night in 2021. He was in prison serving a 10-year sentence. The woman, identified as Jane Doe in court documents, was suing Uber in civil court for negligence, arguing that the company should have done more to screen and supervise the driver, a man with prior violent felony convictions. Publicly, Uber proclaims itself to be a company devoted to handling sexual violence in a survivor-centric and trauma-informed way, supporting survivors and treating them with dignity. After years of fielding reports of sexual misconduct, the company developed instructional videos for drivers that stated sexual violence is never the survivor's fault. But in court filings, Uber argued that Ms. Doe had conducted herself in a negligent and careless manner and had contributed to causing her own injuries, and it was Ms. Doe's claims of pain and suffering were unrelated to the at-issue accident. Now, during her deposition, Uber's lawyer, Taylor Silverberg, zeroed in on Ms. Doe's behavior on the night she was raped. Ms. Silverberg asked Ms. Doe exactly how much Tito's vodka she had drunk, how many milligrams of Adderall she had taken, and whether she had felt regret about mixing the two. and she asked Miss Doe what she had been wearing. "Can you describe the dress?" Mr. Silverberg said. "Were you wearing heels or boots or flats?" Miss Silverberg also probed Miss Doe's childhood, asking if she had felt abandoned by her father or degraded by her mother. She pushed Miss Doe for details about consensual sex and asked whether she had previously been sexually abused or had sex in exchange for money. That is when her lawyer ended the deposition. "I am not anywhere near done," Miss Silverberg protested. "It's her lawsuit, and I have an obligation to defend my client to the best of my ability," she added. Later she offered an apology. "I know this is hard for you, Miss Doe. I am sorry, I really am, but—" "I am grateful it is ending," Miss Doe said, interrupting. "This kills me," she added. Uber's approach in Miss Doe's case is part of its defense strategy as it battles thousands of lawsuits from passengers accusing the company of failing to protect them from sexual violence they said they had suffered during rides, according to thousands of pages of court records, including deposition and trial transcripts. More than 4,000 lawsuits have been filed, so many that thousands were combined to streamline procedural matters. Most remain in their early stages. The New York Times reviewed documents from the 3 cases that reached trial and about a dozen others that have advanced to the stage when the parties start exchanging documents and conducting depositions. The litigation has revealed a clear pattern. Uber's lawyers scour women's private communications, medical records, therapy notes, and other sources for sensitive details, including other sexual assaults, childhood abuse, and domestic violence. They grill the women about those issues, their sex lives, and their behavior on the night of the incident. In one case, Uber petitioned a judge to force a woman to turn over details about sexual abuse she experienced as a child by a family member and a family friend. In another, Uber compelled a woman to undergo a psychiatric exam to investigate other sexual assaults she had reported, and in another, a lawyer for Uber asked a woman whether she had been wearing underwear on the night in question and if she'd become extra sexually active after the Uber incident. At trial, the company has put a spotlight on the women, their choices, and their credibility. Uber's lawyers have argued that the women's past traumas or use of drugs or alcohol made them unreliable narrators. They have suggested that the women consented to the encounters or that they never happened. And they have asserted that even if an assault occurred, something else was the true cause of her pain. Uber's strategy contradicts its own stance as a champion in the fight against sexual violence and reflects the business calculations of a $145 billion publicly traded company facing an avalanche of litigation. Uber has long said it treats all survivors with respect and compassion, including when they sue. The company has struck partnerships with leading anti-sexual assault groups, and it has committed more than $15 million to organizations fighting gender-based violence. After a training guide for Uber's customer service agents who handled reports of sexual violence instructed them to recognize and interrupt victim-blaming attitudes, stating that people rarely lie about sexual assault and that victims do not provoke attacks by what they wore or how much they drank, according to a copy. I'll be the first to say that our adversarial legal system can be particularly tough for survivors, Uber's chief legal officer, Tony West, said in a statement. I've made it clear to my legal team that they must always treat survivors with respect, compassion, courtesy, and dignity. And that's exactly what I've seen them do, he added. Defending the company in a lawsuit and treating survivors with humanity are not mutually exclusive. We must do both. Mr. West declined to be interviewed. Katie Watzman, Uber's chief deputy general counsel, said in a statement that Uber had a right and responsibility to defend itself against lawsuits, which vary widely in severity and validity, and included about 30 cases dismissed for fraud. In multiple statements, lawyers for Uber said their questions about women's past trauma, as well as what they were wearing, drinking, or how they acted, had been intended to gather and evaluate specific facts, not to blame, shame, or suggest that they had done anything wrong. Ms. Silverberg acted with skilled, ethical, and professional representation, consistent with the law, her law firm, Bowman and Brooks, said. The Times previously found that Uber received a report of sexual violence in the United States almost every 8 minutes, on average from 2017 to 2022, a rate far higher than what the company had disclosed. Uber maintains that a vast majority of rides are safe, with 99.9% occurring without an incident of any kind. Legal and sexual violence experts said Uber's tactics go beyond simple fact-gathering and force the women to relive not just the incident in question, but also the most painful moments of their lives. This is likely to re-traumatize the women, they said, and intimidate many into settling their claims or to avoid suing the company at all. The approach also has a deep irony at its core because the company has long marketed itself as one of the safest ways to get around, especially after a night out, said Nora Freeman Engstrom, a legal ethics professor at Stanford Law School. Uber strategy recycles an old and ugly script. If a woman drank, if she rode alone, if it was late, if her memory's imperfect, then maybe she is to blame, Ms. Engstrom said, but those are precisely the circumstances when Ms. Uber told consumers its service was supposed to protect them. For decades, defense lawyers routinely questioned sexual assault accusers about their sex lives, mental health, and alcohol consumption, to characterize them as promiscuous and unstable. That started to change in the 1970s as state and federal lawmakers began passing rape shield laws that restricted evidence about an accuser's sexual history at trial. The lawsuits against Uber are civil disputes seeking to hold the company accountable for corporate safety issues. While some involve drivers who were criminally convicted, many do not. Criminal cases require prosecutors to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, which can be difficult with sexual assault cases when defendants argue the encounter was consensual. The standard of proof in civil court is lower, requiring injuries. Find the plaintiff's claim is more likely true than not. Most of the women suing Uber are seeking compensation for pain and suffering, which means that a key legal question is how much the incident caused their distress compared with other events in their lives. That line of inquiry is common in personal injury cases. In the Uber suits, it has opened the door to an expansive investigation into past trauma, including sexual assault. Turning the lights on, when Mr. West joined Uber as a chief legal officer in 2017, the company was plagued by scandal, including for how it dealt with sexual violence. One case involving a rape by a driver in India made global headlines after revelations that executives had obtained and mishandled the victim's medical records, thinking the assault may have been a conspiracy hatched by a rival. Mr. West, a former Justice Department official and brother-in-law of Kamala Harris, painted himself as a champion of women who had fought sex crimes as a federal prosecutor and worked on legislation aimed at protecting women from violence. That same month that Mr. West started at Uber in November, 2 passengers sued the company, claiming they were raped by their drivers. Uber tried to force the claims into arbitration. Several more women joined the suit, and in April 2018, they wrote an open letter pleading that the company allow them to sue in open court. It was the height of #MeToo, and the use of forced arbitration in sexual misconduct cases was a central issue, with critics decrying it as a tool to silence victims and protect abusers. The next month, in a blog post titled "Turning the Lights On," Mr. West said Uber would no longer require arbitration for individual sexual assault or misconduct claims. We always want to try to resolve these claims in a way that is best for the survivor, Mr. West told CBS This Morning in 2018. If you can't do that, then we want to make sure that we try to litigate these as fairly as possible, he added. For years, Uber settled sexual assault lawsuits long before trial. Some executives worried that the company could be perceived as attacking victims if it fought lawsuits in court, according to 3 people briefed on the conversations who spoke on the condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to comment publicly. But it soon became clear that the move to end forced arbitration had unleashed a wave of lawsuits. Litigation costs mounted as cases increased, the people said. That coincided with the collapse of revenues during the COVID-19 pandemic. Internal discussions shifted. Uber could save millions of dollars if it fought back, the people said. The company did not respond to questions about when or how the strategy changed. Sex, drugs, and trauma. Uber's defense kicks into gear long before a case goes to trial. The company uses the discovery process to delve into the plaintiff's most painful moments. Uber has sought documents about past sexual assault, medical records about diagnoses in the 5 years before the incident, as well as anything that detailed instances of depression, anxiety, or trauma. It also has asked for social media communications related to the women's mental or emotional state. In one case, Uber combed through years of a woman's gynecological records, psychiatric intake forms, therapy notes, and other documents, finding references to her birth control, heavy menstrual periods, and bowel movements, as well as to childhood abuse, concussions, suicide attempts, and other sexual assaults. Depositions allow the company to investigate these issues further. Other than the deaths of your 4 family members that we spoke about earlier, was there any other traumatic event that happened to you in high school? A lawyer for Uber asked one woman. When you say you ended up with a black eye, and I'm sorry, this is unfortunately questions I have to ask, are you saying a lawyer for Uber asked one woman about her spouse that he hit you in the eye? Uber also has deposed the women's friends, parents, spouses, exes, and therapists, according to transcripts reviewed by the Times. During some of those depositions, Uber's lawyers have revealed sensitive information. In one, a woman's father, from whom she is estranged, learned that she had been sexually abused as a child and had an abortion, her lawyer said in court filings. What discovery in these cases entails is brutal for someone who is contemplating coming forward, especially against a defendant with resources and lawyers who will comb through everything, ask for everything, said Deborah Turkenheimer, a law professor at Northwestern University who focuses on sexual violence. Ms. Weitzman, Uber's chief deputy general counsel, said that it was standard practice to dig into pre-existing trauma. When plaintiffs claim damages for emotional injuries and assign 100% of those injuries to the Uber-related incident despite evidence to the contrary, we have to pursue that line of inquiry, albeit reluctantly, she said. On trial, Uber tested out its defense in front of jurors during the first 3 sexual assault lawsuits that went to trial. In all 3, Uber sought to include evidence about other sexual assaults the women had reported. Judges limited how much could be discussed to varying degrees. The first in California last September involved a woman identified as Jessica C., who testified that during a ride in 2016, her driver pinned her down, kissed her, groped her, and tried to take off her pants. Allie Brown, a lawyer representing Uber, put a spotlight on Jessica's choices, including that she did not report the incident to Uber at the time. Ms. Brown also excavated painful moments from Jessica's past, detailing childhood abuse, suicide attempts, and other trauma. Having a history of trauma like that can affect the way you perceive the world, Ms. Brown told jurors during closing arguments, citing testimony from Jessica's psychiatrist. The second trial started in Arizona in January. Jalen Dean testified that her driver raped her during a ride in November 2023 while she was dozing in and out of consciousness. Kim Bueno, another lawyer representing Uber, called attention to the driver's side of the story, telling the jury that in his heart he believed that the encounter was consensual. He said she was wanting to do it and was encouraging the situation, she said. Ms. Bueno challenged Ms. Dean's claims that she had been too intoxicated to consent to sex, arguing that Ms. Dean appeared lucid in video footage shortly after the ride. In graphic detail, she went through Ms. Dean's history of sexual assault and other traumas. Ms. Dean's lawyers urged jurors to focus on other testimony from the driver, who said during his deposition that Ms. Dean had told him that she was very drunk when she entered his car. In his deposition, the driver said that he had a responsibility to make sure that she is in a right frame of mind to give consent, and I didn't do that. In the third trial in North Carolina in April, Brianna Mensing testified that her Uber driver grabbed her upper inner thigh and asked if he could keep it with him during a ride in March 2019. Uber's lawyer, Ms. Brown, described the allegation as a brief leg touch and said the driver denied it. Ms. Brown focused on Ms. Mensing's history of substance abuse, saying the ride occurred during the height of her drug addiction. During each trial, lawyers for the women accused Uber of shaming and blaming them. What kind of evidence does Uber need to actually believe a woman? William Smith, a lawyer for Ms. Mensing, said during closing arguments. At trial, Ms. Brown said Ms. Bueno said that they did not intend to shame the women. Uber won the first case but lost the next 2. All are being appealed. After both defeats, a company spokesman said the plaintiff won far less money than she could have. The jury awarded Ms. Dean $8.5 million, for example. She had been seeking $144 million. In an interview, Ms. Dean said that she was proud to hold Uber to account, but that its courtroom tactics added trauma beyond the pain of reliving the Uber incident. Focus was shifted away from the actual assault and onto my choices, she said. It just made me feel like coming forward was a mistake. When she returned home to Oklahoma, she said she needed to take a break from nursing school. In a statement, Ms. Bueno said Ms. Brown, partners at the prominent law firm Kirkland & Ellis, said that they have an ethical and professional obligation to examine the credibility of each claim. We believe we performed our jobs as defense lawyers and perhaps more significantly our responsibility as women lawyers in these trials with a deep regard and appropriate deference, not just to the seriousness of the allegations, but also the impact of the trial on both these plaintiffs and women more generally, they said. Uber recently agreed to settle hundreds of lawsuits, including some nearing trial. With others, it continues to fight, even in cases when drivers have been criminally convicted. A woman in Texas claims that Uber was negligent after a driver forced her to perform oral sex while driving down the highway. In a criminal trial, a jury found the driver guilty, sentencing him to 11 years in prison. The conviction was affirmed on appeal. The woman's lawsuit is scheduled for trial in October. Uber has referring to the assault as an alleged incident in court documents. During a hearing in June, a judge asked Uber's lawyers whether the company would contest that the sexual assault happened. We certainly don't know enough at this stage, responded Jeffrey Wyatt, a Kirkland & Ellis partner representing Uber. Having a criminal trial transcript is a nice start to understanding the factual allegations in the case, he added. That's all it is. It's just a start. Stocks hit a record as worries about Middle East and AI ease. The S&P 500 rose 1.8%, pushing past its previous peak at the start of June and capping a big turnaround from a recent sell-off in technology stocks. The S&P 500 rallied to a record high on Tuesday, led by a recovery in tech stocks and bolstered by signs that a peace deal between Iran and the United States might once again be in sight. The benchmark index rose 1.8%, pushing past its previous peak at the start of June and capping a strong rebound that has lifted the index nearly 6% over the past week. After a jittery response to last week's comments from Kevin Warsh, the new Federal Reserve chairman, stocks have been lifted by the prospect of fewer immediate rate increases, strong financial results from such big technology companies, cooling tensions between Iran and the United States, and a rare intervention in global markets by the Treasury Department that also helped prop up domestic markets. Investors have latched onto comments from the Trump administration in recent days that Iran and Qatar were making progress in talks to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, a vital oil shipping route, helping extend a turnaround in technology stocks that began last week. Investors remain concerned, however, that artificial intelligence companies that have been spending hundreds of billions of dollars building out data centers may yet run into trouble, such as from less expensive models being developed primarily by China. The S&P 500 has swung high and low over the past 2 months, at times rising on hopes that the conflict with Iran was nearing an end, or because of strong earnings by a large AI company, only for negotiations between Tehran and Washington to fall apart, or for fears about tech overspending to reemerge. Last week, the Nasdaq Composite Index, which includes big technology companies, came close to a correction, Wall Street's term of a drop of 10% or more from its recent peak. By the end of the week, investors' fears began to ease and the market stirred to a rally again. The Nasdaq has risen more than 9% since last Wednesday. Stocks have been supported by continued strong corporate earnings, with companies recently reporting financial results for the 3 months through June. 86% of the S&P 500 companies that have reported this earnings season have posted earnings per share results that beat analysts' forecasts as of Friday market close, according to FactSet. In another move that helped ease the market's jitters, the Treasury Department stepped in to stabilize Japan's weakening currency. The yen had fallen to a 40-year low of 164 per dollar in recent weeks, in part because of worries over the government's spending plans. The currency's drop was intensified by a rise in oil prices. Japan is a large holder of treasuries, and the risk of the Japanese government selling U.S. assets to support the yen had fanned concerns about the sustainability of the U.S. debt, too. Higher Treasury yields also risk destabilizing the AI trade. By helping with the intervention, the Treasury Department was able to limit the direct selling of U.S. assets. On Tuesday, international oil prices fell below $80 a barrel for the first time in 3 weeks, as investors were hopeful that a lull in fighting in the Middle East would hold. Gas prices fell 1 cent on Tuesday to a national average of $4.09 a gallon, according to the AAA Motor Club. Secretary of State Marco Rubio expressed optimism about negotiations to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, a waterway through which a fifth of the world's crude oil is normally shipped. There had been progress in talks, he said, but not finality yet. Some analysts said that they expected the rally in stocks to continue. The excesses that defined the early summer have largely been unwound, said Scott Rubner, a strategist at Citadel Securities. At the same time, the broader economy remains solid despite lingering inflation worries. For the first time in several months, we believe investors can spend less time focused on positioning and more time focused on fundamentals, Mr. Rubner said. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Is it true love or love bombing, sometimes over-the-top affection in a new romance, can be a precursor to emotional abuse? When Sue Knutston was in her late teens, an acquaintance gave her his phone number, changing the course of her life. The two started dating. He praised her incessantly, she said, telling her she was perfect, the woman he'd been waiting for his whole life. He bought her flowers and took her out on lavish dates. He texted her throughout the day to check on her. Ms. Knutston, 35, who lives in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, did not know it at the time, but her new boyfriend was exhibiting a behavior known as love bombing. Although it can be difficult to distinguish from healthy forms of intense early courtship, love bombing is a pattern of behavior that helps people capture the hearts of their love interests only to later control them. Love bombing is a form of vitalization and seduction that becomes the prelude to what will be emotional manipulation and control, said Ramani Durvasula, a clinical psychologist and professor emerita at California State University, Los Angeles. In fact, over time, Ms. Knutston said the dynamic started to shift in her relationship. Her boyfriend began monitoring her texts and calls, she said. He challenged her when she talked to other friends. He made her feel as if she had to do what he said or she'd lose it and end up alone. Too much too soon. The term love bombing dates back to the 1970s when the tactic was used by the Unification Church, a South Korean religious movement that critics and former members have described as a cult. Church members would often shower potential recruits with warmth and praise to get them to join. Today, the phrase is commonly used to describe over-the-top affection and attention at the beginning of a romantic relationship. In casual parlance, daters may talk about love bombing as merely an ick, coming on too strong, or as a preamble to ghosting. But clinicians say that it can be a dangerous red flag. There are no clear statistics on how closely love bombing is linked to abuse, said Chitra Raghaven, a psychologist at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice who studies power dynamics in intimate partner abuse. However, Dr. Raghaven said, I've noticed it in almost every domestic violence case I've had that there was a period of love bombing. Love bombing often takes the form of excessive compliments, implying that the love bomber is the only person who can see how wonderful the other person is, Dr. Raghaven said. The person might say something like, you are really incredible and no one has seen how incredible you are, but I'm seeing it. Dr. Raghaven said it suggests a uniqueness that has not been seen by anybody else but the love bomber. These compliments often play to recipients' deepest vulnerabilities. If people worry they aren't attractive, a love bomber might tell them how beautiful they are. If they feel they aren't smart enough, the compliments may flatter their intelligence. A love bomber also tends to contact a new partner incessantly. They want to see you every day. They show up at work. They call, they text, they send you jokes. Dr. Raghaven said love bombers may also imply that they are looking for long-term commitment. They might say, I can already see the house we're going to live in, Dr. Durvasula, the clinical psychologist, said. What should we name our kids? When the spell breaks. Love bombers' early and intense attention serves to overwhelm people so that they don't think to question why things are moving so fast or how they actually feel. Dr. Raghaven explained it lures people in before they can say, wait, this doesn't seem right, she said. Not everyone who is a love bomber necessarily becomes abusive, and researchers are not sure whether love bombers engage in these behaviors with the clear intent of trapping and later abusing their partners. This is $1 million question, Dr. Durvasula said. It's really difficult, she said, to tease out motivation and intent. Complicating things further, abusers don't usually think of themselves as abusers, said Dr. Raghaven. They think of themselves primarily as people whom the world doesn't understand, Dr. Raghaven said. Love bombers often, but not always, have narcissistic traits, said Amy Brunell, a psychologist at Ohio State University, which can include displaying behaviors that indicate entitlement. They often test the other person's commitment. For example, they may stop texting or calling for a few days, hoping to provoke panic and elicit declarations of affection, Dr. Brunell said. They might also act in a mean way and then later apologize profusely. The love bomber might act as if they are directly threatened by the other person's friendships or hobbies. As Ms. Knutson described, her boyfriend, she said, would complain when she talked to other friends and act jealous. There's a triangulation. You choose me or you choose them, Dr. DeVursula said. If the person refuses to step back from friendships of interest, she added, the pushback is met with anger. Trust your unease. It can be difficult to recognize love bombing when it is happening, Dr. DeVursula said. This is the big one of the challenges. Am I being love bombed, or is this just somebody who's really interested in me, she said. The distinction can be especially difficult because of what we are often taught to expect from relationships, Dr. DeVursula said. Early courtship is supposed to be intense. Love bombing also really plays on our human need for attachment, our human need for love, our human desire to be connected to other people, she said. Because love bombing is difficult to detect, people should not be hard on themselves if they don't recognize it when it happens, Dr. DeVursula said. Still, she advised, be wary of partners who resent your boundaries, your personal interests or friendships, or who pressure you to prove your loyalty or commitment. Ending a relationship with a love bomber can be difficult, as love bombers often retaliate, Dr. DeVursula said. There may be angry texts, name-calling, even stalking. To escape her boyfriend's pursuit of her, Mr. Knutson said she eventually had to move to another state. If there is concern about safety, experts said the National Domestic Violence Hotline can help. Ultimately, it's important to trust your gut early on in relationships, Dr. Brunell said. If it feels like it's too much, she added, it probably is. Alzheimer's blood tests offer new promise to diagnose and predict the disease. New studies are shedding light on how the test could eventually transform treatment. Research presented this week at the Alzheimer's Association International Conference in London suggests that the use of blood tests for Alzheimer's could eventually transform the way the disease is diagnosed and even predict who might develop Alzheimer's and when. One study presented on Tuesday showed that when primary care doctors have access to blood test results, their accuracy in diagnosing whether a patient's cognitive symptoms were caused by Alzheimer's improved considerably. Another study presented on Wednesday and published in the journal JAMA suggested that the blood test could help predict an individual's risk of developing Alzheimer's-related cognitive impairment over 2, 5, and 10 years' time. The findings signaled that these tests, which detect forms of two proteins, amyloid and tau, that are biological markers of Alzheimer's, have growing promise to help patients be diagnosed more easily and to inform healthy people who do not have any symptoms of cognitive impairment of their future risk. The goal is to transform Alzheimer's into a disease that can be treated at its earliest stages and to ultimately find ways to delay and even prevent its devastating memory and thinking problems. However, while experts are excited about the potential of the tests, they say questions remain about how best to use them, and some have concerns about their accuracy. Diagnostic help for primary care doctors. 2 blood tests are currently approved in the United States to help doctors diagnose Alzheimer's in people with cognitive problems. Different variations of the test exist, but the one found to be the most accurate is typically referred to as the p-tau217 test, named for the type of tau it measures. Because the tests are much cheaper and easier to administer than a PET scan or a lumbar puncture, the current gold standards for diagnosing Alzheimer's, they could help more people receive diagnosis and treatment. The study presented at the Alzheimer's Association conference on Tuesday, which had not yet been published in a peer-reviewed journal, provided new data on the accuracy of the tests when used in a primary care setting. In the study, primary care doctors evaluated patients who had cognitive impairment and were asked to determine whether the patient's symptoms were caused by Alzheimer's, both before and after they received the patient's blood test results. The patients were then evaluated by neurologists and received a PET scan or lumbar puncture to confirm the diagnosis. When the primary care doctors had access to the blood test results, the accuracy of their diagnosis improved from 62% to 88%. The physicians also reported that they would change their treatment plans, for instance, starting or stopping medications, referring a patient to a memory clinic, or discharging them. In more than 60% of the cases, based on the blood test results, the accuracy of the blood tests themselves were around 90%. Before the test existed, primary care doctors were faced with almost an impossible task of trying to determine whether a patient's symptoms were caused by Alzheimer's using very limited tools, said Dr. Sebastian Palmqvist, an associate professor of neurology at Lund University in Sweden, who led the research. Now they have an actual test that could help them do the job. The potential benefit of the test may be greatest for people who do not have access to a specialty memory clinic. Not everybody has a PET scan available. Not everybody can do spinal taps out in rural Minnesota, rural America, said Dr. Ronald Peterson, a professor of neurology at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. In such places, he added, a blood test is much more viable. Dr. Palmqvist says that if a doctor does a thorough evaluation, in addition to the blood test, in most cases they can trust the results to make a diagnosis without ordering a PET scan to confirm. But other experts currently think the blood test alone should not be used to diagnose a person with Alzheimer's. In his clinic, Dr. Peterson said he sees instances where there's inconsistencies. The blood test is positive, the PET scan is negative, or the PET scan is positive and the blood test negative. As a result, he corroborates the blood test results to make a diagnosis, particularly if he is going to recommend that a patient try one of the new drugs designed to treat Alzheimer's. There may be several reasons the test might return a false positive. A notable one is that other chronic health conditions can skew the test results, particularly kidney disease, which affects roughly 1/3 of Americans 65 and older. A false positive is concerning, Dr. Milk said, because there could be other factors affecting a person's cognition, like medications, sleep disturbances, or substance use, that might not be addressed if the problem is wrongly attributed to Alzheimer's. Currently, there are not yet any treatment options available for people without symptoms, said Maria Carrillo, the Chief Science Officer of the Alzheimer's Association, which has issued blood test guidelines and a diagnostic checklist for primary care doctors. The new study, which involved nearly 2,700 cognitively healthy older adults from 6 different research cohorts, predicted that having very high p-tau217 levels would be associated with a 38% risk of developing cognitive impairment in the next 5 years and a 78% risk in 10 years. This is an important study, said Dr. Eric Ryman, the Chief Executive Officer Emeritus at Banner Alzheimer's Institute in Phoenix, who is co-leading one of the trials testing anti-amyloid drugs for asymptomatic people. But until there is a treatment for preventing or delaying the onset of Alzheimer's, the experts reiterated that they would not recommend that asymptomatic people take these tests. While some might want the information and feel empowered making lifestyle changes, the improved diet or exercise, for others, the prospect of developing Alzheimer's might be devastating. You can imagine how people may react to this differently, Dr. Peterson said. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the August 5th issue of the New York Times. Your reader has been Claudia, and I thank you for listening.